So this was recognized in the scientific and engineering community already in the mid-19th century. It's just that it was hard to get it up to speed using the technology they had then. However, we have the technology now, more than a century later, to make really smooth tunnel walls because we have tunnel boring machines that can make very smooth and straight tunnels deep underground. So that engineering impediment has been removed. There is now no reason at all why you can't have very fast train transportation underground. I mean at the speeds that commercial airliners go, and even faster, potentially.
How fast does the tube in London go, and what technology moves the tube in London?
The tube in London uses the same technology that's used for the New York subway or the metro in Paris or the metro in Moscow or MARTA in Atlanta, etc. It's just a conventional subway train is what it amounts to. I've ridden the tube in London, and some of the tube tunnels are way down. You take escalators that go so far down you feel like you're going to the very bowels of the earth. But those tunnels were made decades ago, just as the tunnels were, a century ago, even in some cases or more, just as many of the tunnels were in New York City. So those are conventional subway trains that are electrically propelled.
I want to talk about three other people that you mentioned. The reason I'm bringing up their names and the dates is I really think it adds to the evidence base of how far this technology has come. In 1944, you talk about Robert Goddard's vacuum tube shuttle patent application. You talk about, in the 1970s, Michael Minovich's patent high-speed vacuum tunnel system. And then in 1972, Robert Salter's VHST system by the Rand Corporation going 14,000 miles per hour. Can you talk about these people?
Oh, yes. Well, Robert Goddard, of course, is known as the father of modern rocketry and carried out his really groundbreaking rocket tests in Roswell, New Mexico in the 1930s. Of course, the Nazis and others built on his research later in the 30s and in the 1940s. But our modern ballistic missile and rocket technology is based on Robert Goddard's groundbreaking research in the 1930s. Now, in the World War II period and after, he also carried out some other research and design work, if only conceptually. And one of the patents he came up with was for just this. And again, drawing on the earlier work, not only of Eli Beach, but of Hermann Kemper, the German engineer in the Third Reich. And Robert Goddard's patent called for a very high-speed underground tube train tunnel system. And Robert Goddard, in his scheme, called for a shuttle train to go coast to coast in minutes at a speed of over 10,000 miles per hour, like 14,000 miles per hour. So that's already back in the 1940s he was talking about that. He took Hermann Kemper's scheme. Hermann Kemper was only talking about a maglev underground vacuum tube train that would go, say, between 600 to 2,000 miles per hour, something like that. But Robert Goddard took a look at the same technology and said to himself, hey, I can make this go even faster, like, 10 times faster. And so that was his scheme for a very high-speed underground vacuum tube maglev train. Michael Minovich came along in the 1970s and also came up with a similar scheme, a bit slower, but a lot deeper. And Michael Minovich, you have to understand, is the guy who, as a young scientist and a young graduate student at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, came up with a series of equations that makes possible the deep space probes that NASA sends to Jupiter, to Neptune, to Pluto, to Uranus, and even out of the solar system in some cases, because he developed a series of equations that enables deep space probes to use gravity, the gravity well, if you will, of one planet to slingshot a deep space probe even further deep into space much faster than it could have otherwise gone using just the boost that it gets from chemical rockets lifting off from the Earth's surface. Now, Michael Minovich, in other words, was using, through his equations, the gravitational attraction of a planet to boost a vehicle to a very high speed in outer space. He took a very similar approach to designing a deep underground high-speed vacuum tube train system, maglev train system, only in this case he would use a planet's gravitational field, the Earth's gravitational field in this instance, to accelerate a vehicle in inner space instead of outer space. And he would accelerate the vehicle downward on a downward slope, albeit deep underground, to a high speed, riding on an electromagnetic field. So there'd be very little friction, and it would be in a vacuum tube, an underground tunnel from which the air had been evacuated, so there would be no air friction and very little friction from wheels because there wouldn't be any wheels. You would only have an magnetic field that the train would be suspended on, and it would zoom at airliner speed, like 700 miles per hour, through this tunnel deep underground, going as much as 3 or 4 miles underground or more. So that was Michael Minovich's scheme, patented, I think, in 1979, something like that. So we have these multiple schemes.
How about Robert Sauder?
Well, the thing with Robert Sauder is he's also a well-known figure from the world of American science and engineering. And Robert Sauder's scheme built on the work of all of these other men. And Robert Sauder was commissioned by the Rand Corporation, which is well known for working for the American alphabet soup agencies and for corporations on all kinds of cutting-edge engineering projects and scientific research, so forth. They've been at it for years. And the Rand Project is well known for doing studies going back to the 1950s on the construction of underground tunnels and underground bases. So this is nothing new for the Rand Corporation, but the Rand Corporation commissioned Robert Sauder to do a study on building a so-called plane train system, PLAN-TRAN, intercontinental, transcontinental, deeply buried, extremely high-speed underground train system along the lines of what these other men that I've been discussing in the last few minutes I'd taken out patents for. And under the Rand Corporation study, the idea was to build a transcontinental system that would connect multiple cities and would go coast to coast again at about 15,000 miles per hour deep underground using a very high-speed maglev train system, and would go, say, from New York City to California in 10 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, you said at 14,000 miles an hour, 21 minutes from LA to New York. Fascinating.
Yes. And so I think Robert Goddard's scheme actually envisioned the same trip in under 10 minutes. I think in the Robert Sauder scheme, they do allow for one stop in between, maybe at Dallas or Memphis or so forth, and then going all the way, but with side tunnels going to other cities and other destinations with feeder tunnels. So we have this out there in the technical literature. It's not something that I came up with off the top of my head. It's a scheme that has been well discussed, well planned, researched and designed up, down, and sideways. And I'm told that it does exist. I've heard rumors about it, and there are people who say that these tunnels with the high-speed trains zooming through them do exist deep underground. And in fact, the Robert Sauder